Good afternoon and welcome to the penultimate panel discussion of TÜYID's 2022 Sustainable Investment Summit. My name is Amani Koraim and I'm Director and Head of Corporate Product for Europe and EMEA at Institutional Investor Research. Today we're discussing the impact of ecosystem downgrade on company operations and profitability. And we have invited two fantastic panelists to bring in their expertise and insights into this discussion. I just wanted to share an anecdote with you. I suffer in the spring and summer month with hay fever, and to help with the symptoms, I eat a lot of local honey. So local bees are very, very important to me, and I treasure them greatly. And I recently actually came across an article in Forbes magazine, which looked at the value of bees as a business. So if bees were a corporation, so B Corp, Forbes estimates that their market cap would be around $20 billion. So insect pollination in total is actually worth over 200 billion a year, larger than all but 30 public companies globally, and worth over $25 for every man, woman, and child on this planet. So in human terms, if you like, bees are part of a value chain, not only crucial to our economy, but to our very survival. And we know that over half of the world's total GDP, moderately or highly dependent on nature and its services. Nature loss is therefore really important and matters for most businesses through impacts on operations, supply chains, and markets. And the late great Kofi Annan also warned us, and he said that preservation of biodiversity is not just a job for governments or international and non-governmental organizations, but also private sectors, and each and every individual really has an important role to play in changing those entrenched outlooks and ending destructive patterns of behavior. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my panelists who will guide me through this discussion. We have Adriana Pierelli here, who is Regional Executive Manager at BNY Mellon, and Christina Church, who is Head of Responsible Strategy at BNY Mellon Investment Management. Thank you both for joining us here. Adriana, if you could briefly introduce yourself and share with us why this topic is so important to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alice, and particularly for this invitation. I think this topic is so important to all of us. As you say, Adriana Pierelli, I'm responsible for Southern Europe for a number of our large clients, but also I'm responsible for ESG at our European bank, which is headquartered in Brussels and a CIF in its own right. We are operating the capital markets for our clients, and hence we have a lot of visibility on the investments and the activities of our financial institutions clients.
Thank you. Christina, if you could please introduce yourself as well.
Yes, hello, Christina Church. I'm Head of Responsible Strategy at BNY Mellon Investment Management. And we are a group of 8 affiliated investment managers who all focus on generating returns for our clients via their investment strategies. And many of those strategies do focus on responsible investing. And within that, a key focus on environmental issues and social issues. And I think what's increasingly coming to the forefront is this, urgent need to focus both on financial returns, but also how we can encompass environmental and social returns as well within those considerations. And as you said, nature, so much of the world is heavily dependent on nature's resources and ecosystem services, and therefore it's absolutely vital to understand those impacts and how we can value those impacts, because it's increasingly important to really understand the value of nature and which resources are sustainable and can be regenerated, and which resources are one-off, and we can't keep using them to the extent that we have been. So it's a vital topic for us in financial services, for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Adriana, I will come to you first, if I may, and go straight for the jugular. We obviously said that nature has really not gotten a price tag. We don't really know what the value of nature is and how to assess that yet. But what we do know is that institutional systems have really underinvested in natural assets and focused much more, obviously, on what you refer to as the produced capital. Adriana, how do degraded ecosystems affect businesses, and where do you see the the key challenges are and the risks really for nature?
First of all, let's define the right language. What is nature? And nature is, I should say, everything. It's soil, it's biodiversity, it's ocean, it's air. So it's everything that surrounds us and allows us to live. Let's just kind of start from there, which I think is a critical component of what we're discussing. And you're right, we haven't really looked with the right time horizon to understand completely the impact. And when you're talking 44 trillion and half of everything we do from a GDP perspective, it's so huge and so enormous that we do need to start looking at the possible consequences in economic terms and just start thinking about economic value of nature, because that's probably the best way we have to start thinking not only in the public sector and the government, but also in the private sectors and for every single company, what this actually means. I think we've done more in the climate agenda perspective, but it's so much interlinked with environmental sustainability that trying to link the two doesn't make a lot of sense. But we certainly need to do a lot more work to create this idea of economic value of nature, which will help then a number of other considerations.
Very good. Christina, I come to you now. In terms of choosing a sustainable path, obviously that is, a requisite for transformative change. What are, to you, the key drivers that will actually help companies and people to shift into that transformative mode?
Yeah, and I think it very much goes back to Adriana's point about understanding what nature is and understanding that, if you define it and understand that, you can start to think about the impacts, and once you start thinking about those impacts, it's understanding then how we can manage those both in a positive way and to prevent any of the negative impacts on nature. I think in terms of really tangible things that can be done, I first of all, it is really information and understanding the data that is required, and I think there's some very useful frameworks still in early stages of development, but trying to help for corporates to understand how to disclose that impact on nature, because the impact goes well beyond sort of direct impact. You have to look through the entire supply chain of companies. And as people and as consumers, we have to think about our impact on nature in terms of consumption. What the food that we eat, where has that come from? How has it been produced? Is it using sustainable agricultural processes? There's so many different impacts. The medicines that we use in health. Where are those being sourced? And it's coming back to that idea of understanding which parts of nature are renewable and which are non-renewable. And therefore, I think as a company, we need to really focus, companies need to focus on understanding how to really get the best benefits out of nature. How can they use the renewable parts of nature to the extent that they can then allow them to renew? And then the elements that are less renewable, I'm thinking here sort of fossil fuels and soils and minerals that really are more one-off in nature, ensuring that they are only used for the most vital considerations. And I think it's very much moving away from this sort of linear take, make, waste way of looking at the economy and moving to this a circular economy and using biomaterials a lot more in production. So there's so many different things to consider, but first of all, it's really identifying what the issues are, where the risks are, and then of course always thinking about the opportunities and how can we use nature better and value it properly.
Yeah, very good point. Adriana, I come to you now. From thinking about the concept and really defining the framework that we're all operating in the travel, the direction of travel, going from sort of ideas to action. What are the solutions and the accelerators that will help help with that transition?
I guess the evaluation first, right, of both the risk and the opportunities is a critical element to accelerate. There is a lot that can actually be done in terms of investments, and I'm thinking about opportunities because that tends to kind of get companies to focus more sometimes than the risk side of things. there is an opportunity that just by changing the infrastructure, but changing the infrastructure and just providing some of the solutions that are technological in nature, and sometimes it's just kind of changing the approach to nature, we could invest some 6.5 trillion per year. That represents 2/3 of all the investments, capital investments that companies do every year. So you're talking about a massive transfer of value to sectors that could really help us accelerate the solution or the management of the problems that we have and protect some of the 44 trillion that we were discussing before. The numbers are huge. So it's a question of focusing attention of companies and people in daily activities to really think it through a different lens. So I go very much what Christina was saying before about learning and understanding, because that learning and understanding will allow investors on one side just to really distinguish, but also people in everyone's life to select and decide what they want to buy, how they want to buy. And that's going to be massive in terms of helping the investments that are necessary. And again, going back to the 6.5 trillion per year, just focusing attention on where to invest those money and that capital allocation, which is going to be critical in the next few years.
Yeah, very good. Maybe this is a question that both of you can actually answer. Perhaps, Christina, if I come to you first. Obviously, we've seen that COVID has become a real sort of catalyst to this narrative and really driving the conversation forward, and so has actually technology. What do you see the role of technology in this transition? And perhaps you can highlight a few examples. I believe your background was also in auto, or you looked at auto as well as one of those areas. Perhaps you can share with us some insights from that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, the pandemic really has brought nature into focus, and the idea of humans and our interaction with degrading ecosystems and the impact that can have, as well as in the atmosphere and the transfer of pollution it all brings nature really to the fore, which is exciting because it starts to really drive companies to understand that they have to make changes and find solutions. And that's exactly where technology plays a key role. There's so many roles where technology can ensure that we can use more efficient solutions. We can use better use of materials. As you mentioned, my background in automotive, it's a sector where that really has been a huge transformation over the last few decades. Use of materials that are more renewable, or maybe lighter weight and more efficient, that can really mean that we're not using so many of the really critical resources, focus away from combustion engines to electric vehicles, but that drives a shift in use of resources. Batteries in an electric vehicle are very dependent on many of nature's resources. So understanding supply chains and understanding that technology can really drive abilities to reduce that focus on materials. But it goes across all sectors of industry. We can think about agriculture and how technology can really help with smart farming and more efficient use of ability to generate food using fewer use of pesticides, etc. There's so many ways that technology can play a role. They can also play a role in adaptation to climate damage, and ensuring that we can use nature to preserve and make sure that we can bring that to the fore. I think in Turkey in particular, there were examples last year of sort of the devastating impacts of forest fires in the south, and also flooding. And all linked into ecosystem services, and if we can use technology to ensure better use of adaptation to that, there's some really powerful ways that we can drive opportunities and mitigate the risks from degradation of nature.
Very good. Adriana, do you have a few thoughts on that as well, please?
Yeah, I think it's also the quantitative aspect of it, right? So Christine was talking about batteries. Now, in order to be able to do what we need to do by 2040, right, to hit the net zero then by 2050, the amount of energy stored that we must increase is by 400 times compared to where we are today. So it's just sometimes the sheer quantity of what we can do and what technology is going to allow us to do. So there are two elements to this. Some is new technologies. In the battery sector, there are a number of ideas, but also, extracting carbon from plants, for example, is a very big area where a lot of money is being invested as we speak, because we know that's going to be absolutely critical. At the same time, is more in detail having enough data in order to be able to drive the change. If you're thinking about agriculture, how do you really get more data from the success of utilizing greener approaches to the environment and to agriculture in order to be able to get the best output? And how do you then continue to refine the type of approach? That's going to be based on a lot more information and detail that can be produced, and utilizing artificial intelligence to, again, use the best type of approach and expand the utilization of that best approach where possible to various kind of areas and various other sectors. So there is quite a lot that can be done, which is very exciting in a way, right? We have on the one side a huge among those problems, but that was not different to where we were with COVID-19. COVID-19 was, in a way, the proof in action that if we focus attention on a huge problem, we can find solutions that we didn't expect that we could be able to get in such short time frame. It's the same approach here, that where we really need to kind of get all together and try to see what technologies we need to invest first. And some of these technologies are not yet there. I mean, we need to even think through new technologies. Think about hydrogen. That's not a new technology, but it's going to be a massive change if we're able to use it more effectively. And again, there is an element of multiplication that we need to operate under in order to be able to get where we need to be. And it's just a huge aspect of both creating new technologies as well as implementing in critical mass in a very short period of time. So it's quite interesting from that perspective.
Yeah, very exciting. And given the situation that we're obviously facing, how can we meaningfully apply the triple bottom line, if you like, people, planet, and prosperity, to the evolution of those global or the global society and those systems, especially considering as well aligning the needs of local communities who have a very strong and good grasp of their issues and challenges and opportunities. How do you align that with national politics, with a myriad and plethora of actually international organizations and initiatives and obviously global authorities? How can you bring that together, Christina?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, and as you say, I think often it's the local communities that know their land the best, and there's plenty of evidence to show that in indigenous areas, there's ability to preserve land 30% more than in areas where there isn't that local focus on nature. So I think it's incredibly important that although there's preservation of nature is a global issue, that the global and the local work together, and also to ensure when we're thinking about financing and the scale that is needed, as Adriana said, the amount that is needed is often where it is most vitally needed is often in the areas where there is the lower access to that vital funding as well. So it's really focusing on ensuring that if we are transitioning, that we're doing so in a just way, in a way that brings all communities along in that process and understands the impact. I think that was one of the big shifts that we saw with COP26 last year, the big focus on not so much just on the move towards net zero, but if we're moving and transitioning in that way, can we do so in a way that brings all communities together, and that the financing can move into emerging and developing economies as much as developed economies. And as you say, there's so much huge change right now in the regulatory environment, and the political pressure is fantastic to see that there is so much regulatory focus on environmental issues. I think up until now, climate has been the key focus, but we're certainly seeing in 2022 is quite a pivotal year, I think, for nature. We've had the COP15 and the Convention on Biological Diversity bringing back onto the agenda the need to achieve targets related to nature. But we also have the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures, having come out with its first beta framework for how we can really start using an understanding of language and disclosures by companies related to nature. And I think what's really exciting that we're beginning to see in the regulatory backdrop is a lot more convergence in standards. We are seeing a lot of standards that historically we might have had regional standards. We're now seeing international standards for sustainability disclosures. In the US, we've seen a big surge in the SEC coming out with new climate proposals. But what's very interesting to see there is that they are linked to the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-related Financial Disclosures. And so there's a lot of acronyms in this world, but the TNFD is also saying it is aligning to similar disclosures to the TCFD. And that is incredibly important because in order to generate the finance that we need to move into the right directions, we don't want to add too much complexity here. We do need to see international standards coming together so that when we're understanding values, we can look at them globally and we can compare companies across regions. And I think that will very much help to ensure that where the money is needed and where local areas most desperately need to understand the impact, that it can still be comparable globally.
Yeah, very good. Adriana, would you like to add your view on that as well, please?
I think it's exactly what Christina was saying, right? It's so important just to kind of link. In a way, there is an element which helps to look differently also at emerging markets, meaning to the extent that most of the economic value may be in the developed markets. From a natural perspective, a lot of the value is actually in a number of emerging markets. So there is an aspect, if we really start looking at this correctly, we could just have a different perspective on where action needs to be taken in order to maximize the value to the world as a whole. Of course, the data that is required in order to be able to do that and the understanding becomes critical. And I agree completely with Christina, the local population. So the really understanding that needs to be granular by location is needed because the same solution is not going to be applicable or applied in different parts of the world, and you need to have a detailed understanding of the problems that are there or the opportunities or the value of what is there in order to be able to not create damage in the areas where you have the better natural value present. Think about the Amazon, right? And the discussion you have in places like Brazil are very different from the discussion that may actually take place in a place like Germany. And we need to have both, and we need to have both at a certain level of detail. But it's very visible now. I mean, you should think that in California, just yesterday, I think they announced the fact that people could not use water to water their gardens anymore, other than once a week. All of a sudden, it's becoming very visible to everyone under the sun, from simple things like, hey, do I use water just to drink? Or for health reasons, as opposed to kind of water my garden, to things that are much more relevant in terms of how do we ensure that we're not destroying the nature that we have, because otherwise, how are we going to be able to build it back? It's just going to be impossible. So a lot more to happen in that field, but I think it is extremely interesting how, if we're really applying properly the concept of natural value, we could just have very different discussion and different decisions to be made across the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the expression, Adriana, now is probably build it forward. That's sort of my understanding of how people refer to it. If I may, I would like to stay there because and make it perhaps a little bit more tangible and practical, if that's possible. When it comes now to ecosystem and biodiversity, what are the different consideration and steps for emerging economies, because a lot of the emerging economies are, much more reliant on natural resources as well. So what is the impact, and what are the sort of, I guess, next steps, if you like, for those kind of markets? Christina.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you said, it's that dependency, and if we can understand the dependency and the data required and as Adriana said, location being so key, we have to have that localized information about data to understand the impact. And I think we are obviously hearing a lot more at the moment, very topical, of sort of cost of living crisis, and particularly with agricultural components and cost of food going up it's in those emerging economies that are where that will have such a drastic impact on people's lives, and where there is still so much necessity to draw from nature. I think we really have to ensure that there is enough land to go around and water to go around for all, both fresh water and the preservation of the oceans as well. That I think, if we're thinking about what the solutions are for developed markets versus emerging, they will be incredibly different, as Adriana said. And I think with it also the speed of the transition, what we will need to think about. But there will need to be a lot of work done to ensure that we can help areas where it isn't so easy to shift that mindset. If we come back to Adriana's comment about the Amazon, if there's deforestation happening, and where the financial implications for the communities there really mean that they're reliant so much on the land and a harmful impact on that land. But we need to work with those communities to ensure that we can shift that balance and make sure that they can still generate the returns that they need to support their families and to live, but to do so in a way that can really balance with nature. And I think that there will be more onus on developed economies that have used up a lot, certainly in terms of the carbon budget, further ahead than some of the emerging markets, that they need to action faster as well, and work to ensure that everybody can come together to ensure the benefits of nature. But I do think it comes back to that point on opportunity. If we really think about nature as an opportunity, that's where we can say, well, if emerging markets are some of the areas that are most dependent on nature, they should therefore be enjoying the benefits of nature to a greater degree too, and the financial benefits from it too, if we were to place the right financial value on nature.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. We've had a previous panel discussion looking at greenwashing, but I would like to also bring that into this conversation, if I may, and ask both of you as well to comment. Now, in terms of greenwashing, what do you think are sort of the key messages that, change people's thinking and behavior?
Shall I start with that? In terms of, I mean, I think there's elements of greenwashing that may be, not deliberate by nature, but I think really the idea is that we just want to have as much disclosure as possible to ensure that, right now there's a lot of voluntary disclosure at corporate level. If companies really have frameworks to understand how they should disclose and what data they should disclose and what data is the most material to each company, I think that will really help ensure that there is less risk of greenwashing. The worst case scenario is where you got companies promising the earth and not delivering on it. I do think often they have, there are best intentions behind those promises, but if we don't have the data to really understand that companies are following through, and we can track targets and see metrics that really show the delivery, I think that's the way that we can start changing people's behavior from just sort of showcasing, saying words about what they're doing, but to actually following through with really tangible impact. And again, it comes back to sort of valuing. If we place more value on some of these solutions that can really drive change, then greenwashing won't be so prevalent, because people will see the real financial opportunity from acting.
Yeah, what's your view, Adriana, on that as well?
Yeah, I guess there is a huge dislocation, right, in terms of companies. And I was interested to see that in September last year, the Carbon Tracker Organization issued a report that's called Flying Blind, the Glaring Absence of Climate Risk in Financial Reporting. Now, this is based on 2019 and 2020 reports, but they already expected on the higher carbon intensive firms. So they reviewed 107 of them. They expected to see some actual data that was coming back in terms of information on the effect of climate. And I'm really talking even here about climate rather than the larger environmental sustainability aspect. And what they found is that over 70% of the companies didn't provide data, and 80% of the auditors that were auditing the reports were not highlighting this as an issue. Now, it's difficult then for investors to be able to understand whether a company that actually has made some representations about being ready in 2050 for net zero, how does that then kind of, how do you see that information in a financial report is going to be critical. So I think data goes, back to what Christina was saying, data is going to be critical. Information being, visible in accounting reports, so in annual reports, in a way that is comparable, is going to be critical to make to really differentiate between one company is doing everything that is right and is taking into account how climate is going to change their own business in the next 5-10 years, and those that don't. This has an element of risk management, so how the capital needs to be allocated to move away from riskier business to where you want to allocate your capital as a carbon intensive company or not, right? I mean, we say environmental sustainability touches everything, so let's kind of think wider. How do you capture some of this 6.5 trillion that we were saying before in terms of opportunities? So there is an element here of ensuring that we have more data that is visible, that is clear, that people can assess in order to be able to, if you're an investor, invest in a company rather than another, or vote in a different manner, or if you are a consumer, you are able to decide whether I want to use X versus Y. All of these items become very, very important. There is a journey. It's not the easiest thing ever. I'm not suggesting that in any way, but we need to start, and we don't have a lot of time because things are happening out there and it's visible from a climate change perspective. So we really need to address that. I suggest that, in a way, the regulators are also pushing the financial system. So both the institutional investors as well as the financial institutions to leverage and to use that information in order to lend or to help a company to go to market, and just fund itself directly with capital markets. But it really becomes a critical component. And at this point, there are a number of elements, both on the issuers as well as on the investors, that do require all of us collectively to help avoid the concern of greenwashing, because that concern is actually preventing a number of people from investing in the right companies because you don't really know. So absolutely critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And Christina, I come to you. We have only a couple of minutes left now. Adriana has already highlighted a few of those areas, but what is the role of investment managers as stewards, and how can they help companies? And also conversely, what are the top tips for corporates, especially investor relations, who is really our audience here today, and the executive management teams, as well as the board, in terms of next steps, and what is it that they could tangibly do right now?
Yeah, there's so much that they could tangibly do. And you just say, resources are always tight. But I think stewardship for us as investment managers is absolutely key. Engaging with companies and corporates and investor relations teams to really drive home what we are looking for as investors in terms of that disclosure that Adriana was talking about. What is the information that we most want to see, so we can engage for information, and that can really help us get more insight into companies and understand better how they are positioned for future risks and opportunities. We can, of course, also engage for change and to drive impact. And that is clearly the more powerful mode of being stewards of our clients' money. And that can really drive work with corporates, with the boards and with their investor relations teams to really showcase what are the key issues, what are the most material drivers of change and what are the tangible elements that those companies can do to achieve that change. And that's a really powerful way to see an impact on communities and for corporates to act today.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you very much, Adriana. I'm sure there's so much more that we could have discussed here, but we have reached the end of our time slot here. Thanks again for your time and your insights. It's a big topic. We move forward, we build back forward, or we build forward, I guess. Yeah, I guess it's a journey. So, well, thank you very much again for your time, and all the best.